Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in the briefing room, her left arm held slightly stiff against her body. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Fort Carson's main administrative building, casting long shadows across the polished floor. She had been dreading this moment for weeks, ever since the new commanding officer had arrived. Colonel James Hartford was known throughout the Army for his uncompromising standards. At 52, he had served in 3 combat deployments and had a reputation for weeding out what he called soft soldiers. His steel-gray eyes swept across the assembled officers as he outlined the new physical fitness requirements for the base. Ladies and gentlemen, I've reviewed the fitness scores for this unit, and frankly, I'm disappointed. Colonel Hartford's voice boomed across the room. We have too many soldiers skating by on minimum standards. That ends now. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She knew her recent fitness test scores had dropped, and she knew exactly why. The 3 surgeries on her left shoulder over the past 18 months had left her unable to perform at her previous level, but she had been cleared for duty, and she was determined to prove she could still serve effectively. Effective immediately, all officers will participate in enhanced physical training sessions, the colonel continued. No exceptions, no excuses. If you can't keep up, perhaps it's time to consider a different career path. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah maintained her rigid posture, but inside, her mind was racing. She had worked too hard to get where she was to let anyone question her dedication or capability. Colonel Hartford's gaze landed on Sarah. Captain Mitchell, I see from your file that your recent fitness scores have been concerning. I trust you'll be ready to meet the new standards? Sarah's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Good. Because I have no patience for soldiers who make excuses for poor performance. His words carried a weight that made it clear he had already formed opinions about her based on those test scores. After the briefing, Sarah walked quickly to her office in the operations building. Her shoulder ached with each step, a constant reminder of the roadside bomb that had changed her life forever. She had been leading a convoy through Afghanistan when the improvised explosive device had detonated just 20 feet from her vehicle. The blast had thrown her against the armored door, dislocating her shoulder and tearing ligaments that would require multiple surgeries to repair. But she never spoke about that day. Not to her fellow officers, not to the medical staff, and certainly not to commanding officers who might see it as a sign of weakness. In the Army's culture, admitting to ongoing physical limitations was often seen as making excuses, regardless of how those limitations were acquired. Sarah's assistant, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, knocked on her office door. Ma'am, do you need anything for the new PT requirements? I heard the colonel is implementing some pretty intense training protocols. Sarah looked up from her computer screen. I'll manage, Sergeant. Just make sure my gear is ready for tomorrow morning's session. Sergeant Rodriguez hesitated. She had worked with Sarah for over a year and had noticed the captain favoring her left arm, especially on cold mornings or after long days. Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, maybe you should talk to the colonel about your shoulder injury. I'm sure he would understand if he knew what happened in Afghanistan. No, Sarah's response was immediate and firm. I won't give anyone a reason to question my ability to lead soldiers. The medical board cleared me for full duty, and that's all anyone needs to know. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Sarah stood with 20 other officers on the base's training field as Colonel Hartford outlined the new fitness regimen. It was more demanding than anything she had faced since her injury, involving rope climbing, weighted carries, and extended push-up sessions that would put tremendous strain on her damaged shoulder. We'll start with a simple warm-up, the colonel announced with what Sarah suspected was deliberate irony. Everyone grab a 20-pound sandbag. We're going to carry these for a 2-mile run. Sarah grabbed her sandbag and fell into formation with the other officers. Within the first half-mile, her shoulder began to scream in protest. The weight of the bag, combined with the bouncing motion of running, sent sharp pains down her arm and across her back. She gritted her teeth and continued, refusing to show any sign of distress. By the 1-mile mark, she was falling behind the main group. Colonel Hartford, who was running alongside the officers despite his age, dropped back to pace beside her. Problem, Captain? He asked, his breathing steady despite the pace. No, sir, Sarah managed between breaths. even as sweat beaded on her forehead from both exertion and pain. Because if there's some sort of physical limitation I should know about, now would be the time to speak up. Sarah forced herself to pick up her pace slightly. No limitations, sir. Just need to improve my conditioning. Colonel Hartford studied her for a moment, then sprinted ahead to rejoin the main group. Sarah knew he was testing her, looking for any sign of weakness or excuse-making. She would not give him the satisfaction of either. The training session continued for another hour, involving exercises that seemed specifically designed to test upper body strength and endurance. Sarah pushed through each one, her shoulder joint feeling like it was on fire by the time they reached the final rope climbing exercise. Standing beneath the 30-foot rope, Sarah knew this would be her biggest challenge. Rope climbing required the exact type of overhead pulling motion that her surgeons had warned her to avoid until her shoulder had fully healed. But backing down now would only confirm whatever suspicions Colonel Hartford already had about her fitness for duty. She gripped the rope and began to climb. Each pull upward sent lightning bolts of pain through her shoulder, but she forced herself to continue. Halfway up, her left arm began to tremble with the effort. Other officers were already at the top and sliding back down while she struggled to maintain her grip. "Come on, Mitchell," Colonel Hartford called from below. "Are you planning to hang there all day?" The comment stung, but it also fueled her determination. Sarah pulled herself upward with grim resolve, relying more on her right arm and legs to compensate for her weakening left shoulder. When she finally reached the top, her vision was blurred with pain, but she had made it. The slide down was almost worse than the climb up. The rope burned against her palms as she tried to control her descent, while her shoulder screamed in protest. When her feet hit the ground, she had to lock her knees to keep from collapsing. "Adequate, Captain," Colonel Hartford said as he approached her. "Though I hope your performance improves with practice." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. As the other officers began to disperse, she remained standing by the rope, waiting for the worst of the pain to subside before attempting to walk back to her office. Over the following weeks, the enhanced training continued 3 times per week. Sarah showed up for every session, pushing through pain that sometimes left her nauseous and dizzy. She began taking over the counter-pain medication before each training session, and had started seeing a physical therapist off-base, paying out of her own pocket to avoid any official medical documentation that might be seen as requesting special accommodation. Her performance in other areas of her duty remained exceptional. She was known for her attention to detail, her ability to manage complex logistics operations, and her skill at mentoring junior officers. But Colonel Hartford seemed focused solely on her physical fitness scores, which continued to lag behind her peers despite her best efforts. During one particularly brutal session involving weighted pull-ups, Sarah's shoulder finally reached its limit. As she attempted to complete her set, her left arm simply gave out, causing her to drop from the bar earlier than the prescribed number of repetitions. Colonel Hartford appeared beside her almost immediately. "Is there something you'd like to tell me, Captain Mitchell?" Sarah wiped sweat from her face with her right hand, keeping her left arm close to her body. "Just need to build up my strength, sir." "Strength training doesn't typically involve favoring one arm over the other," the colonel observed. "Unless there's an underlying issue you haven't mentioned." "No issue, sir," Sarah replied firmly. "I'll complete the exercise." She gripped the pull-up bar again, this time trying to distribute the weight more evenly between both arms. She managed to complete 2 more repetitions before her shoulder forced her to drop again. Colonel Hartford stepped closer, his voice low enough that the other officers couldn't hear. "Captain, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I won't tolerate soldiers who can't meet basic fitness standards. If you have a medical condition that prevents you from performing these exercises, you need to declare it officially." Sarah met his gaze directly. "I don't have any medical conditions that prevent me from performing my duties, sir." "Then perhaps you're simply not trying hard enough," he replied coldly. "Or maybe you're one of those officers who thinks they can coast on their rank without maintaining proper physical standards." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had never coasted on anything in her military career. Every promotion, every assignment, every achievement had been earned through dedication and hard work. The suggestion that she was somehow trying to take shortcuts was deeply insulting. "I can assure you, sir, that is not the case," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Colonel Hartford studied her for a long moment. "We'll see, Captain. We'll see." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, her shoulder packed in ice and her mind churning with frustration. She knew she was caught in an impossible situation. Revealing her injury might protect her from further accusations of poor performance, but it would also likely result in questions about her fitness for continued active duty. The Army had invested years of training in her, and she had climbed to her current rank through merit and dedication. She wasn't ready to let a shoulder injury end her career, but the alternative was allowing Colonel Hartford to continue believing she was simply out of shape or unwilling to work hard. Every fiber of her being rebelled against that characterization. She had proven her courage under fire, had led soldiers through dangerous missions, and had never backed down from a challenge in her military career. The next morning brought news that would make her situation even more complicated. Sergeant Rodriguez informed her that Colonel Hartford had scheduled individual fitness assessments for all officers to be conducted over the following week. Each officer would be required to demonstrate proficiency in a series of exercises while being personally evaluated by the colonel. Sarah knew this was her moment of truth. She could continue to struggle through the assessment while hiding her injury, likely confirming Colonel Hartford's suspicions about her dedication. Or she could find a way to demonstrate that her worth as an officer extended far beyond her ability to complete physical exercises that aggravated a combat-related injury. As she prepared for what might be the most important week of her military career, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would not reveal her injury through words or excuses. Instead, she would let the evidence speak for itself, regardless of the consequences. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force both Sarah and Colonel Hartford to confront their assumptions about strength, sacrifice, and what it truly means to serve one's country. At precisely 1400 hours, Sarah knocked on Colonel Hartford's office door. His voice called for her to enter, and she stepped into the spacious room that reflected his distinguished military career. Commendation plaques lined the walls, and a large American flag stood in the corner beside his desk. Colonel Hartford was standing by the window, looking out at the training fields where other soldiers were conducting afternoon exercises. He turned when she entered, and Sarah noticed that his usual commanding presence seemed somehow diminished. "Please, sit down, Captain," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs in front of his desk. Sarah remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." Colonel Hartford studied her for a moment, then moved to his own chair behind the desk. He sat down and opened a thick folder that Sarah recognized as her personnel file. For several minutes, he read through documents in silence while Sarah waited at attention. "Captain Mitchell," he finally began, "I've spent the last several hours reviewing your complete military record. I should have done this more thoroughly when I first arrived, and I owe you an apology for that oversight." Sarah remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Your record is exemplary," the colonel continued. "Bronze Star for actions under fire. Combat Action Badge. 3 Army Commendation Medals. Consistent top ratings from every commanding officer you've served under. And according to these medical reports, you were recommended for a Purple Heart. Though I see you declined the award." "Yes, sir. I felt it wasn't necessary." Colonel Hartford looked up from the file. "Why did you decline a decoration you had clearly earned?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. "I was doing my job, sir. Leading my soldiers through a dangerous area. Getting injured in the process wasn't heroic. It was just an occupational hazard. The real heroes were the soldiers who pulled me out of that vehicle and provided security while the medics worked on my shoulder. The medical report indicates that you remained conscious throughout the incident and continued giving orders to your soldiers even while being treated for your injuries. That was also my job, sir." Colonel Hartford closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Captain, I made a serious error in judgment regarding your situation. I allowed my focus on physical fitness standards to blind me to the broader picture of your service and capabilities. That was wrong, and I apologize." Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly. "Thank you, sir. However," the colonel continued, "we still need to address the practical aspects of your situation. I cannot in good conscience continue to require you to participate in physical training that could potentially worsen your injury or cause you unnecessary pain. Sir, I don't want any special treatment. I've been cleared for full duty by the medical board. And that clearance stands, Colonel Hartford assured her. But there's a difference between being cleared for duty and being required to perform exercises that serve no practical purpose beyond meeting arbitrary fitness standards. Tell me, Captain, how does your shoulder affect your ability to perform your actual job responsibilities? Sarah considered the question carefully. In my day-to-day duties, it doesn't significantly impact my performance. I can't lift heavy objects overhead, and I have some limitations with prolonged computer work if I don't take breaks to stretch. But I can perform all the essential functions of my position, and in a combat situation, I can still fire my weapon accurately with both hands. My marksmanship scores haven't declined. I might not be able to carry a wounded soldier over my shoulder, but I can still lead, make tactical decisions, and perform most combat functions. Colonel Hartford nodded thoughtfully. I've been in the Army for 28 years, Captain. I've seen soldiers overcome incredible obstacles to continue serving. I've also seen soldiers who used minor injuries as excuses to avoid challenging assignments. The difference is usually apparent in their overall performance and attitude. He stood up and walked to the window again. What happened in the gymnasium today taught me something important about assumptions. I assumed that your declining fitness scores indicated a lack of dedication or effort. I never considered that they might indicate someone working harder than anyone else, just to maintain acceptable standards. Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that had nothing to do with her physical injury. For weeks, she had been fighting not just pain, but the assumption that she was somehow failing in her duties. I'm implementing some changes to our physical training protocols, Colonel Hartford announced. We'll be developing alternative fitness assessments that focus on functional capability rather than arbitrary standards. Soldiers with documented injuries will be evaluated based on their ability to perform mission-essential tasks. That's not necessary for my benefit, sir. It's not just for your benefit, he replied. This base has soldiers recovering from various injuries sustained in service to their country. We should be measuring their readiness based on their actual capabilities, not on their ability to perform exercises that may be irrelevant to their duties. Colonel Hartford returned to his desk and pulled out a different set of papers. I'm also recommending you for a position on the base's Injury Rehabilitation Committee. We need experienced officers who understand both the challenges of recovering from combat injuries and the importance of maintaining military standards. Sarah was surprised by the offer. Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of assignment. Captain, you've spent the last few weeks demonstrating exactly the kind of perspective we need. You understand the difference between making excuses and adapting to limitations. You know what it means to maintain high standards while dealing with physical challenges, and you've shown the courage to be honest about difficult situations when honesty was needed. I'd be honored to serve on that committee, sir. Colonel Hartford made some notes on the papers before continuing. There's one more thing I want to discuss. I understand you've been paying for private physical therapy sessions to supplement your rehabilitation. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Yes, sir. I wanted to ensure I was doing everything possible to improve my condition. That expense should be covered by the Army's medical system. I'm going to personally ensure that you're connected with the appropriate resources here on base. We have excellent physical therapy facilities and specialists who understand military-specific injuries. Thank you, sir. But I don't want to appear to be seeking special treatment. Colonel Hartford fixed her with a direct stare. Captain, using available medical resources to maintain your health and readiness is not special treatment. It's responsible self-care that serves the interests of both you and the Army. Part of being a good soldier is taking care of yourself, so you can continue serving effectively. He signed several documents and placed them in official envelopes. These are letters of commendation for your personnel file, recognizing your outstanding performance, despite the challenges you've faced since your injury. I'm also recommending you for accelerated consideration for promotion to major. Sarah was stunned. She had expected this meeting to be about managing her limitations, possibly even about reassignment to less demanding duties. Instead, Colonel Hartford was recommending her for advancement. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept the recommendations and continue serving with the same dedication you've shown throughout this difficult period. Yes, sir, absolutely. Colonel Hartford stood up, indicating the meeting was concluding. "Captain, I learned something valuable today about leadership. Sometimes the strongest soldiers are the ones who continue performing their duties despite facing challenges that would cause others to seek easier paths. Your example has reminded me that true military bearing isn't about perfect physical performance. It's about perfect dedication to duty, regardless of personal cost." Sarah came to attention. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I don't believe you could if you tried," he replied. Dismissed. Captain. As Sarah left the colonel's office, she felt a profound sense of relief and validation. For the first time since her injury, she felt like her worth as a soldier was being measured by the right standards. She had proven that her scars told a story of service and sacrifice, not weakness or limitation. Walking across the base toward her office, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The roadside bomb in Afghanistan had changed her body, but it hadn't changed her commitment to serving her country. The weeks of painful training sessions had tested her resolve, but they had also proven her determination to meet any standard required of her. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the most courageous act is simply being honest about your limitations, while continuing to exceed expectations in every way possible. Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting in the office with a stack of operational reports when Sarah returned. "How did the meeting go, ma'am?" "Better than I expected, Sergeant. Much better." "Good to hear, ma'am. The whole unit has been talking about what happened in the gym today. I think you've earned a lot of respect from soldiers who maybe didn't understand what you've been dealing with." Sarah sat down at her desk and began reviewing the reports. "We all deal with challenges, Sergeant. The important thing is that we don't let those challenges prevent us from doing our jobs." Over the following weeks, Colonel Hartford implemented the changes he had promised. The new physical fitness protocols focused on functional abilities rather than standardized tests. Soldiers with documented injuries were evaluated based on their capacity to perform their specific duties, rather than their ability to complete exercises that might be irrelevant to their assignments. Sarah took her position on the Injury Rehabilitation Committee seriously, working with medical staff and fellow officers to develop programs that helped soldiers return to full capacity while respecting their individual limitations and recovery timelines. She became an advocate for soldiers who had been struggling with similar challenges, helping them navigate the complex balance between maintaining military standards and acknowledging the realities of combat injuries. Her shoulder continued to improve gradually through proper physical therapy and reasonable exercise modifications. She would never regain full pre-injury capability, but she learned to work effectively within her limitations while continuing to excel in her leadership responsibilities. 6 months later, Sarah was promoted to major, recognizing both her outstanding service record and her contributions to improving how the military supports soldiers dealing with combat-related injuries. At her promotion ceremony, Colonel Hartford spoke about the importance of recognizing different forms of military excellence. "True strength in military service," he told the assembled officers and soldiers, "isn't always measured by physical capability. Sometimes it's measured by the willingness to serve, despite personal cost, to lead despite facing challenges, and to maintain the highest standards of duty, regardless of the obstacles encountered in that service." As Sarah accepted her new rank, she thought about the scars on her shoulder that had seemed like such a burden just months earlier. Those scars had become symbols not of limitation, but of sacrifice, endurance, and the kind of quiet courage that defines the best military leaders. She had learned that the strongest soldiers aren't necessarily those who can climb the highest rope or complete the most push-ups. The strongest soldiers are those who continue serving their country with excellence and integrity, regardless of what challenges they face in that service. Her scars had told that story more clearly than any fitness test score ever could.